This happened last year during a solo road trip I took from Wisconsin to Montana. Most of the roads along the way were basically empty, except for the first and last hour. Everything in between was just forest or open fields, maybe some small mountains the further west I went. Because of how I planned my schedule, I was going to be driving all through the night and most of the next day instead of splitting it into 2 full days and spending on an extra hotel room. I knew it would still be a challenge, but I thought it was worth it. I started driving at 7 p.m. I double-checked that everything was packed into my car with my snacks and drinks in the front seat next to me. Then I hit the road. The first hour was through the city and some small towns, but after that it was open highway. Hardly any other cars and not many places to stop aside from a gas station every 15 miles or so. By the second hour, I'd only used a third of my gas tank. But since gas stations were becoming fewer and farther apart, I figured it would be smart to top off before I got into the really empty stretch ahead. It took another 20 minutes before I finally found a station. There was no one else there. It was just this tiny place with 4 pumps. The convenience store wasn't even open. I pulled in and parked by a pump, got out, and started fueling the car. I'm not sure if it was because the place was old or maybe hadn't been serviced in a while, but the gas was pumping out really slow, almost a full minute for a single gallon. I leaned against my car and waited. That's when another car appeared on the road. The speed limit was 55, but this car was going maybe 20 or 30 at most, passing the station at first but then slowing down and backing up. That was weird and honestly pretty dangerous for a single road like this in the middle of the night. But they backed up to the entrance and pulled into the station, stopping at the pump right behind me. I figured they must have missed the turn and needed gas badly. I kept facing forward toward my pump as I heard someone get out and walk around their car. But after a minute of not hearing them start fueling or moving at all, I glanced over to see what they were doing. The man was wearing a gray flannel shirt and black jeans, and he was fairly tall. He was staring at me. Like when I looked over, his eyes were already on me. I gave him an awkward smile and a nod, then quickly looked away again. Still, I felt like he was still watching me. After about 10 seconds, I finally heard him grab the pump and put it in his car. I felt relieved, thinking maybe he really was just getting gas and I had overthought things. I stood there another minute before deciding I had waited long enough. I put the pump back and locked my gas cap. When I did, I noticed the man staring at me again. His eyes looked so dull and tired, like he hadn't slept but had chugged caffeine or something. I got in my car and pulled back onto the road. Weird guy, I thought, but I didn't think much more about it. A few hours later during the drive, it started raining. I had now been driving for 5 hours and it was just past midnight. The rain made me focus harder on the road, which made the drive even more tiring. I opened an energy drink and grabbed a snack, but it didn't really help much. By 1 a.m. I knew I needed to take a break. My gas tank was running low again too. I drove along the long, empty road until I finally saw a gas station to pull into. It looked pretty run down and was as empty as the last one, but the lights were still on. I filled my tank and then pulled into one of the parking spaces beside the small building. I checked the weather to see how long the rain might last and searched for nearby towns, but there were none. It looked like I was stuck in the middle of nowhere. I figured it was safe enough to take a quick 30-minute nap to refresh myself and maybe wait for the rain to ease up. I leaned the seat back and dozed off. When I woke up, the rain was still tapping on the roof, and my alarm hadn't gone off yet. I had only been asleep for about 25 minutes. I sat up and looked out the windshield. The whole place was quiet, but there was a car parked at one of the pumps. I leaned forward for a better look. It was the same car from the last gas station. I was nearly sure of it. Either this was one huge coincidence or something was seriously wrong. Even weirder, the guy was nowhere in sight, not in his car or outside. I felt the color drain from my face. Where could this guy be? There was nowhere else at this empty gas station for him to hide. Whatever was going on, I didn't want to stick around to find out. I turned on my car and put it in reverse. But when I checked my mirror as I backed up, I saw him, not behind the car. He was sitting in my back seat, staring straight at me through the darkness. I gasped and threw the door open, jumping out onto the pavement. The car was still in reverse, slowly rolling backward. I started running, but never heard the man open the door or step out. I ran into the woods and watched as my car rolled backward for a while before stopping. A moment later, he drove away, leaving me stranded at some strange gas station in the middle of nowhere. That's when I realized my phone was still on the dashboard. I stood there in shock for a moment, standing in the rain and trying to process what just happened. Then I noticed the man's car. He had just left it there. I walked over and found the door unlocked, the keys still in the ignition, and random groceries sitting in the back seat. By some strange luck, I saw his phone lying on the floor by the passenger seat. It was locked, but I was still able to call 911 from the lock screen. I didn't understand at the time. I figured whoever took my car had just been careless and left their stuff behind, but this wasn't their car. It had been stolen too. Everything in it belonged to someone else who the man had done the same thing to as he tried to do to me. From what I later heard, the others hadn't been as lucky to get away unharmed. When I talked with the investigators, they thought the man didn't sneak into my back seat and let me drive off by accident. They believed he was going to wait until we were far on the road to reveal himself. Who knows why, whether he wanted a hostage or something even worse. He was never caught, and neither was my car. This happened when I was in my early 20s. I used to live in a small house with 3 other guys. None of us really knew each other before moving in together, but we all went to the same college and graduated at the same time. Since all of us were searching for a place to live after that, it just kind of worked out. By splitting the rent 4 ways, we managed to afford a small house on the rural outskirts of the city. Anything closer to town was simply too expensive. Everything went fine for the first 9 months or so, but then 2 of the guys suddenly decided to move out, leaving just me and KJ. Unfortunately, KJ was the one I didn't really talk to that much. He was always busy working, getting home late, or just not interested in hanging out with the rest of us. So it sucked that the other 2 were the ones who left. It also meant KJ and I had to pay double each month. This wasn't something we could handle long term, so we agreed that once the lease ended in 3 months, we'd go our separate ways and leave the house. For the first month after the 2 moved out, it became really clear just how rarely KJ was around. On my days off, I'd usually be home all day and night by myself, which felt strange compared to when the other 2 were still living there. I didn't mind too much though. Honestly, it felt nice having the whole place to myself. Still, I thought it was odd that KJ was gone for such long stretches all the time. He only worked part-time in the morning, so I assumed he must have been out with friends every night. One night, however, I stayed up a bit later than usual. I was sitting in my room around 1 a.m. when I saw headlights shining through my window, pulling into the gravel driveway. When I heard the front door open, I got up and felt like saying hi, just to avoid things getting even more distant or awkward between us. I opened my bedroom door but was caught off guard when I heard footsteps rushing down the hallway. When I peeked out, I startled him like I'd caught him doing something wrong. The hallway lights were off, so I couldn't see him well, but I noticed his eyes were wide and his body was frozen just outside his bedroom door. "What's up, KJ?" "Just checking in to see how you're doing," I said to break the silence. The way he stood there in the dark hallway, staring at me with those wide eyes, gave me chills. "I'm good," he finally said. After another few seconds of silence, I just nodded and stepped back into my room. That definitely didn't make things less awkward between us. Why was he acting so strange, rushing to his room like that? I didn't want to pry, but it started to bother me. After a couple of minutes, I quietly opened my door and carefully walked down the hallway. I just wanted to listen for a second as I passed by his room and nothing more. But when I got close, I heard him moving around frantically, opening and closing drawers like crazy. It was so strange that I stopped walking for a moment and leaned in a bit closer to the door. The frantic noise continued, making me feel uneasy until it suddenly went silent. Everything stopped like he had frozen in place. As the seconds passed by, I grew more and more uncomfortable and wanted to get out of the hallway. Before I could move, though, the door suddenly swung open. KJ stood in the doorway, those same wide eyes locked on me, staring without blinking. Trying to cover for myself, I said I was heading to the kitchen and asked if he wanted anything. KJ softly muttered no, then shut the door on me. Honestly, it was really unsettling and made me feel like something was seriously wrong with him. I went into the kitchen to keep up the excuse, then returned to my room. He stayed quiet for the rest of the night. For the next 5 or 6 days, I found myself paying a lot more attention to what KJ was doing. I'd stay awake until he came home, always feeling too uneasy to sleep until I knew he was in his room and not doing anything strange. During those days, he stayed in that same disturbing, almost zombie-like state that I first saw that night. His eyes grew more restless every day, and he barely said a word, always rushing straight into his room. Then one night, after he got home and while I was in bed trying to fall asleep, I heard a knock at my door. It startled me. I hadn't even heard him walk down the hallway. I got up and opened the door. He had that same restless-eyed stare, but this time with a partial smile. He told me he had just gotten home and thought he'd dropped his wallet somewhere out on the driveway as he was walking to the door. He asked if I had a flashlight and could help him look for it real quick. I thought it was odd since he'd never asked anyone for help before or even to do anything with him. Although it seemed strange and I was tired, I figured maybe this was a chance to ease the tension. So I grabbed a flashlight and followed him out to the driveway. He started some small talk, asking about work and things like that. As we walked on the gravel and looked around, I immediately noticed his car was parked really far down the driveway, like all the way at the end for no reason I could see. So if he'd walked all that way up, we now had to do the same going back to search for his wallet. We reached his car and I hadn't seen anything on the ground. Then he began leading me away from the car. I kept shining the light around, realizing there was no reason his wallet would be away from the driveway like this. I asked what we were doing. KJ paused for a few seconds, like he was thinking, then said he'd gone for a short walk earlier and might have dropped it there, but I wasn't buying it. He kept trying to guide me deeper into the woods, away from the driveway. Every time I said we should turn back, he'd insist we keep going. It got suspicious really fast. "Here, take the flashlight. I'm heading back to the house. I've got to be up early for work tomorrow anyway," I said, offering him the flashlight and trying to leave. He didn't take it. His obviously fake smile faded, and his restless eyes looked more disappointed than ever. He seemed angry. He didn't say anything, but the tension made me feel more uncomfortable by the second. After a few moments, I turned and quickly walked away from the woods. I glanced back a couple times and saw KJ still standing there, staring at me. As soon as I got inside the house, I started packing. I had no idea what that was all about, but I didn't feel safe with him anymore. I didn't sleep at all that night, listening closely in case KJ came back and did something else, but he never returned to the house. In the morning, I grabbed all the important stuff, loaded it into my car, and left. Even after all these years, I've never heard anything about KJ or figured out what he was doing. His behavior wasn't normal at all, and I honestly believe he was planning something terrible in the woods that night. It was the middle of 2018. I was 23 years old and had driven down to Vermont to visit my family and stay for a few weeks. While I was there, I also wanted to do some camping, since my parents' house was just outside the Appalachian Mountains. Back when I still lived with them, I would go out there all the time, but since moving away, I hadn't had the chance to go camping or even hiking. There was one particular place that had been on my mind for quite a while. Just before I moved out, I found a trail mentioned on a forum for people who explored abandoned structures, and I'd been wanting to check it out ever since. This trail supposedly led to an old lodge sitting deep in the forest. So on a Monday morning, I drove out to the area. I parked on the side of the road since the trail wasn't marked or anything official. It was clearly just a rough path made by random explorers like me who wanted to see the abandoned lodge. The trail was very overgrown though, and it looked like no one had been down there in quite some time. The hike itself took just under 2 hours, and although the trail was mostly flat, it was a difficult walk because of all the weeds and bushes growing into the path. But I eventually made it. My plan was to camp inside the lodge, simply because I thought it would be fun. Still, I came prepared with a tent and gear in case the lodge was too damaged or unsafe to stay in. Good thing I did, because just from the outside it was obvious that the place wasn't safe to sleep in. Most of the roof was gone, caving inward on itself, and the logs making up the walls were covered in thick vines and mold. The door was wide open though, so I peeked my head inside to look around. The smell was awful, and with so much of the interior decayed and falling apart, there wasn't much I could actually explore. There was a door at the far end of the main hallway that looked like it was still intact, and I wanted to check it out, but the floor looked far too sketchy to risk walking over. So I ended up backing out of there. I didn't have any other plans, but with the sun already starting to set, I began searching for a good place to set up camp. There really weren't many choices, so I simply walked about 200 feet away from the lodge and cleared a small spot to pitch my tent. As the sun set, darkness slowly covered the distant lodge until I couldn't see it anymore, and the sounds of the forest changed into crickets and the soft crackling of the small campfire I built. I really wanted to stargaze, but the area was surrounded by towering trees that blocked most of the sky. On top of that, it was partially cloudy. So instead, I sat by the fire, tossing sticks into the flames and letting my mind wander until I heard something. I'm not really sure how to describe the sound, but it was pretty loud, maybe wood bending or creaking. And even though I couldn't see the lodge anymore, the noise came from the exact direction where I knew the lodge stood in the dark. It only lasted a few seconds, but gave me chills. Maybe it was just the old wood shifting in the wind, or maybe it was something else. I sat quietly and listened for nearly half an hour, but didn't hear anything more. It was only about an hour into the night, but I knew that if I didn't check it out now, I wouldn't be able to sleep. So I figured I might as well go investigate while it was still early in the night. I threw more sticks onto the campfire to keep it going before I left, so I wouldn't have to rebuild it later. Then I grabbed my small LED lamp and walked toward the lodge. After just a minute of walking, the structure appeared faintly in the light. It looked every bit as creepy as I expected. I approached it cautiously, passing a few broken windows while holding my lamp up to see inside. Even with the light, it was so dark that I could barely make out anything. When I reached the door, I froze for a moment. It was shut. Less than 2 hours ago, I had left it wide open. Then I noticed something else strange. There were scratches along the front of the door, like from nails or maybe a knife. I hadn't seen them before, so I wasn't sure if they had always been there or if they were fresh, and maybe the cause of the noise I heard. I stood there for a moment debating whether I should even try opening it or if I should just leave. But the decision was pointless, because when I finally tried to open the door, I couldn't. It felt like something on the other side was holding it shut. Feeling deeply unsettled, I didn't stick around any longer. I backed away from the lodge and hurried into the woods toward my campsite. But right away, I noticed something was wrong. Other than the light from my lantern, there was no other glow coming from the forest. I started moving faster, hoping I was still headed in the right direction. Luckily, I was, and within a minute, I found my way back to the tent. A thin column of smoke rose above the campfire, as if someone had just put it out while it was still burning. I stood there, holding my lantern up, straining to see anything in the darkness between the trees. "Hello? Hello? Who's out there?" I called. No one answered. A chill ran through me again. I knew the hike back to my car was only 2 hours, so I quickly decided to pack up and leave. I took down the tent as fast as I could, and while I stuffed the last few things into my backpack, I heard a sound close by. I stopped, held up the lantern, but still couldn't see anything. The sound was strange. It was someone laughing. Quiet, soft, not like laughing with friends. It was the sound of a single person chuckling under their breath, watching me from the shadows like they were completely insane. I hurried, leaving scraps behind and racing for the trail. My lantern was cheap and dim, making it really difficult to follow the path, but I did the best I could. A few times I stopped, sure I could hear the faint laughing again and afraid that I was being followed. But whoever was stalking me out there, they blended perfectly with the darkness. I never once caught sight of them. I finally reached the road, got into my car, and drove away fast. Looking back at that night 7 years later, it still stands as the most terrifying and disturbing experience of my life. I don't think anyone can really understand the helplessness I felt, alone in the forest at night, stalked by some deranged stranger. Maybe they had made that abandoned lodge their home. I honestly don't know. But after everything I saw and felt out there, I don't think anyone should ever go back to find out. When I was 21 years old, I worked a maintenance and custodial job at the nearby daycare just down the block. My responsibilities included taking out the trash, moving and setting up furniture for special events, performing preventative maintenance, organizing supplies, cleaning and maintaining the facility, caring for equipment, and overall making sure the place was safe, which also meant reporting any suspicious activity that could lead to child abuse or mistreatment. Some days I would be the one opening and closing the facility. It was a pretty tough job since it was just me and one older guy who was basically my boss. Most of the time I was the one locking up the building because he usually left earlier. The daycare itself was part of the grounds that also had a Catholic school and church, though I'm fairly certain the daycare welcomed anyone regardless of religion. The older worker, who I'll simply call B, was leaving early this particular day. I think it was a Friday because he always left early on Fridays. He gave me a list of tasks to finish before cleaning up. Start with the usual classroom cleaning, then pack up the remaining Thanksgiving decorations from the classrooms into the crates, bring those downstairs to the basement, and after that, start bringing the Christmas crates upstairs. These crates were filled with decorations for the entire building, including the lobby, hallways, and classrooms. The child care staff would handle putting the decorations up, but my job was to clean everything and carry the crates up and down the stairs. Now that Thanksgiving had passed, it was time to bring out the Christmas decorations. By then, all the kids and staff had left. It was dark outside, probably between 6 and 7 in the evening. I was the only one left in the building, so I made sure all the doors were locked while continuing my work. I headed down to the basement, which was mostly used for storage. Since the weather was cold and outdoor playtime was over, all the courtyard toys were kept down there for the season. This included, but wasn't limited to, plastic slides and those little toy cars that kids moved with their feet. The basement had a hallway that passed by the boiler room and the water heaters, and at the end of the hall was the main storage room. That storage room always gave off a creepy vibe, mostly because of its poor lighting, or the lack of it. There was no direct overhead light down there. The only light came from 2 dim bulbs in the corners and a small light from the hallway. The basement ceiling wasn't very high either. I had to crouch slightly in certain spots to avoid hitting my head. It felt like a strange mix between a basement and a crawl space, but since I'm 6'3", this probably wasn't a problem for shorter people. There were small basement windows that made the place brighter during the day. But obviously, by now it was dark, so I relied on a flashlight. I carried the Thanksgiving crates down one by one and left them near the front of the basement, mostly because I was feeling lazy and wanted to get home and start my weekend. As I was dragging one of the Christmas crates up the stairs and through the hallway, I suddenly heard a child's voice and then laughing. It was very muffled, but I knew I definitely heard something. I stopped pushing the crate and started checking around. I went into every classroom, the indoor playroom, the art room, and even the bathrooms, every place I could think of. There were no kids anywhere. But I kept hearing that faint, muffled voice now and then. The one spot I hadn't checked yet was the basement. I slowly walked back to the basement door and stared down the stairs, waiting. I heard another sound coming from down there. It hit me that a kid might have wandered down there, so I ran down the stairs, shouting, "Who's down there?" thinking maybe a child snuck in. I got to the bottom and hurried along the hallway to the storage room. I saw one of the toy cars roll for about a second before stopping. It was like someone had just pushed it. I stood frozen, looking around the room, but there weren't any kids that could have moved that car. I called out, "Anyone down here?" several times, but the place was dead silent. The quiet felt overwhelming. I even started checking inside the boxes and containers, thinking maybe a kid was hiding. But as I searched, I realized there was no way a child could have closed these boxes or containers from the inside. At that moment, I felt completely alone, but also like I wasn't. It's hard to explain. Then, right behind me, I heard something plastic drop onto the floor. There wasn't any draft in that basement. I didn't even turn around to look. I just ran straight upstairs without glancing back. I paused at the top of the stairs, and that's when I heard what sounded like a child's whisper coming from below. I immediately slammed the door shut. I didn't know what else to do, so I called Bob. He told me that if I thought there was a child down there, I had to call the police. The frightening part was that I really didn't think it was a child, but I still dialed 911 because I couldn't just leave without knowing for sure. And I was right. There were no kids down there. When the police arrived and searched the basement with me, all they found were the boxes and containers full of supplies and decorations. I also couldn't locate anything on the floor that could have made the plastic sound I heard. Since there was nowhere left to hide and no reports of any missing kids, the police couldn't do anything except leave. I could tell they thought I'd wasted their time, but I was too shaken to care about being embarrassed over calling them. I quit the job just before Christmas. I never wanted to step foot in that basement again. A childhood friend of mine named Ethan and I went on a short camping trip in the forests of Maine. Both of us were fairly experienced campers. However, this was Ethan's first time visiting this particular spot. I had been here plenty of times before, so I knew the area quite well. We hiked several hours down a trail to reach a clearing in the trees where we set up our camp. I believe we arrived at around 6 in the evening. After getting everything prepared, we built a nice campfire and made some food. Then we cracked open a few beers and talked by the fire as the sun slowly set. It was a calm and enjoyable night. About 2 hours into the evening, we heard what sounded like something moving just beyond the edge of our campsite, in the darkness outside the light of the campfire. We looked around but saw nothing unusual. For the rest of the night, we didn't hear anything else. We figured it was probably just some small animal scurrying away. Honestly, if nothing else had happened, I probably would have forgotten all about it. That's how minor it seemed at the time. If you're not used to camping, this might seem strange, but noises like that happen all the time out here and usually mean nothing. Once we had our drinks and started getting sleepy, we decided to call it a night, poured out the fire, and got into our tents to sleep. In the morning, we woke up early because this camping spot had a special feature. There was a very secluded and private pond about half a mile through the woods from our campsite. Hardly anyone knew about it since the trail didn't actually lead there. It was a beautiful spot with a mini waterfall and a small river running through it. We spent most of the morning there for maybe 3 or 4 hours. Eventually, we headed back to camp to make some food and rest for a while. I even took a short nap. Later that day, around 6 again, the sun was getting lower, and we hadn't gathered any firewood yet for the campfire. Most of the dry sticks lying around camp had been used the night before, so I needed to search farther to collect enough. While I was busy, Ethan said he wanted to take a walk and explore some of the other areas, but he'd pick up any firewood he found on the way back. I said, sure, and kept gathering sticks from the ground. Ethan usually did this whenever we went camping. I think he enjoyed some alone time to take in the quiet of nature. I ended up getting a good pile of firewood and sat back down at camp, just passing time until Ethan returned so I could light the fire. The sun kept getting lower, and after a while I realized he had been gone longer than usual. He normally wasn't out this long, and he knew better than to wander the woods when it was getting close to sunset. The only way we could communicate out here with no cell service was by using our small satellite messengers. We always kept them in our waist packs, along with bear spray and other essentials. These were meant for emergencies, but they came in handy for times like this too. I pulled out my messenger to send him a message, but noticed he had already sent me one just a few minutes earlier. Ethan said he had gotten a little lost, but happened to find his way back to the pond. I replied, telling him to stay put and that I'd hurry over to guide him back. When you're lost, it's always safest to stay in one place rather than risk getting more lost, and both Ethan and I knew that. Since I knew the area well, I quickly set off toward the pond. It was now a race against the setting sun. Even with headlamps and knowing the trail during the day, it would still be very easy to lose your way after dark. I got about halfway to the pond, maybe 4 or 5 minutes away, when I received another message. I reached into my bag and checked it, expecting Ethan to just be checking in or asking how far I was. But what he sent surprised me. His message said, "I see you." I didn't understand what he meant. I wasn't even near the pond yet. I stopped walking and looked around, confused because I didn't see him anywhere nearby. I replied that I wasn't there yet and didn't see him either. Feeling uneasy, I started hurrying, basically running toward the pond. I got there quickly and ran up to the tree line near the water. But Ethan wasn't there. From where I stood, I could see the entire tree line surrounding the pond, and there was no sign of him. I felt a chill as the blood drained from my face and pulled out my messenger again. My last message to him saying I didn't see him hadn't been opened. I shouted his name, my voice echoing through the quiet trees. The sun was almost completely gone, and the forest was becoming darker and still. Maybe he had decided to head back to camp, somehow remembering the way. I didn't know why he would, but where else could he have gone? With almost no daylight left, I knew it was safest to head back to camp and sort things out there. I hadn't lit the campfire yet, so if I waited too long, finding the campsite in the dark would be almost impossible. I began walking back, feeling nervous as the forest grew darker with every step. The strange message, "I see you," kept repeating in my mind. By the time I was a minute or so away from the clearing, it was almost pitch black. That's when I noticed something, a flickering orange light coming from where the camp should be. As I got closer, I saw the campfire was lit and someone was standing beside it. I walked toward the figure, feeling relieved, thinking Ethan had made it back. But as I approached, the person suddenly turned toward me and sprinted away from the fire into the woods. My heart pounded as I ran to the camp, confused and frightened. That wasn't Ethan. I grabbed my messenger and started sending texts quickly. Now I was genuinely worried and disturbed by everything happening. A minute or so later, Ethan came running out of the forest and into the camp. His face showed both fear and relief. He immediately said we needed to leave. I agreed, telling him about the person I had just seen at the campfire. Ethan said it was probably the same person he saw earlier near the pond. He explained that he thought it was me at first, until he got closer and realized it was someone else. Ethan said he had asked if the man knew the way back to the trail, but the stranger didn't respond. Instead, he kept slowly walking toward him, wearing a very unsettling smile. According to Ethan, something about the man's face seemed off, like it was strange or unnatural. Something wasn't right. Ethan panicked and ran in the direction he thought would lead him back to camp, getting lost again, but eventually seeing the fire and heading toward it. We quickly packed our things and left. The hike back to the car was nerve-wracking, but we managed to make it safely. After this experience, I kept thinking about the entire camping trip, especially the movement we heard that first night outside the camp. All the pieces started to fit together. Most likely that man had been out there the whole time watching us, waiting for one of us to be alone. Just imagining him standing silently outside our camp as we talked and slept, completely unaware, is incredibly disturbing. We still talk about that trip every so often, but we've never planned to go back to those woods again. I worked the graveyard shift at a nearby shipping warehouse. Most of my tasks involve counting inventory, making sure every shipment and item is accounted for and tracked during the entire organizing process. Occasionally I'll have a coworker on the same shift, but most of the time it's just me alone. This night was no different from any other. I arrived at the warehouse and checked in with my manager, who then locked up the place and left me to handle things. I began my usual routine, checking all the shipments that arrived during the day as I normally did, and about an hour into my shift I walked past a door that I noticed was slightly open, like it had been closed but not fully latched into the doorway, sticking out a little. This particular door was at the back of the building, usually where truck drivers entered. I pulled it open and peeked outside, seeing an empty, quiet lot behind the warehouse with nothing really noticeable. I figured my manager had simply forgotten to lock it. I didn't have the key to these side access doors, so I couldn't lock it myself. Honestly, I didn't care that much. It just didn't seem like a big deal to me. I closed it behind me and went back to counting inventory. I was moving pretty fast, getting through a good amount of work and reaching the next aisle of shelves when, out of the corner of my eye, it looked like something shifted at the far end of the hallway. I quickly looked up but saw nothing there. What I thought I saw, just from my peripheral vision, was someone dashing across the hallway, opening back there. I figured it was probably a strange trick my mind was playing on me, but it still got my heart racing for a moment. I shook my head and rubbed my eyes, wondering why I was seeing things. I considered whether I should go check it out, but decided not to at first, since walking all the way down there would slow me down and I was 99% sure it was nothing. Stuff like this happens all the time, thinking you see something from the corner of your eye, and every other time it turns out to be nothing. So why would this time be any different? Still, as the minutes went by, I couldn't shake the small feeling that maybe someone really had been there. I sighed, feeling a little disappointed in myself for being so rattled, and walked to the end of the hallway. I never really go to this section because it has nothing to do with my usual tasks. It's filled with shelves stacked with large pallets already prepared to be shipped out of the warehouse. Since I don't work in that area, most of the lights were turned off. I stood in the hallway and stared into the large dark room for a few moments, waiting to see if anything would move, but everything stayed still. I left that hallway and went back to my work in the same spot I had been before. I don't know if it was because of that small incident, but I suddenly felt a wave of exhaustion hit me. All at once, I felt tired and not nearly as motivated to work as I had been just minutes earlier. I wanted to finish this aisle before taking my break though, so I kept going. But not even 5 minutes passed before I noticed something again out of the corner of my eye. I quickly snapped my gaze toward the end of the hallway, could have sworn I saw a figure, like someone leaning out from behind the corner watching me. But again, there was nothing there. This time I dropped what I was doing immediately and rushed toward the end of the hallway again. It was dark there, and once again I really didn't see anything at all. I called out, not really expecting a response, but figured it wouldn't hurt. "Hello?" I waited for a few seconds, then slowly walked further into the room. It was completely silent, and each step I took echoed all the way through the warehouse. I stopped about halfway in and looked around carefully. As I stood there, I got an overwhelming and disturbing sense that I was being watched. Not being able to see anything made the feeling even worse. I hurried back toward where I'd come from, making it to the end of the hallway before glancing back once more. The darkness in that room sent chills down my spine. I turned to walk away and returned to my work when a sudden, extremely loud thud rang throughout the warehouse. It sounded metallic, like someone slamming something against one of the big shelving units. After a few seconds of silence, filled only by faint, lingering echoes, there was another thud, quieter this time, like a soft tapping against the metal shelf. It felt like someone was deliberately trying to get my attention, to tempt me back into the dark room. But now, knowing this had to be a real person and feeling completely terrified, I ran away. I hurried to the back door and out into the parking lot. After putting some distance between myself and the warehouse, I called for help. I didn't expect much from the police at first, not right away anyway, but surprisingly, when they searched the place, they found someone hiding behind one of the big shelves in the dark room. It was a man in his 40s with a very messy and creepy appearance. What made it even creepier was that after checking the security footage, they saw him walking around the outside of the building several times over the past week, trying all the doors to see if any were unlocked. On all those nights, I had been working alone in the warehouse, sometimes just on the other side of the door from him. From the short glimpse I got of him being dragged out of the warehouse and into the police car, he seemed completely unhinged and crazy. I'm not sure if they ever really figured out what his plan was, but just thinking about him trying to lure me into that room still leaves me feeling very uneasy. I'm an only child living with my mom and dad in a fairly spacious home. It feels a bit too big for just the three of us, but my parents always joke that they never meant to have just one kid. They simply never got around to having more. I was 15 years old when this event occurred. It was a rainy Saturday night sometime in May. I can't recall the exact date, but I do know it was during one of the last weekends before summer officially began. One last thing I should mention is that I suffer from a number of strange medical issues that make life a bit challenging. I get panic attacks often, faint easily, and sometimes struggle to breathe. I'm also one of those people who need complete silence to fall asleep. Even the hum of a small fan is enough to keep me wide awake. I've mostly figured out how to manage it, but things like sleepovers or trips remain miserable for me. People always say they love the sound of rain because it helps them drift off. but it has the opposite effect on me. It doesn't rain much where I live, but when it does, the downpours are intense enough to keep me awake the whole night. To be fair, this wasn't a full thunderstorm, but the rain was steady and loud enough that no matter what I did, I couldn't drown out the sound of the drops tapping against the roof. It was late, well past midnight, when I finally accepted that I wasn't going to sleep. So I got out of bed, trying to think of ways to burn off some energy. Eventually, I decided to take a short walk in the rain. This wasn't the first time I'd done that. In fact, my parents encouraged it whenever I had trouble sleeping. We live in a very safe neighborhood, and there's a big public park right next to our house, so being out late never felt dangerous. Besides, the park is well lit, which made me feel even safer about walking there at night. I put on a rain jacket, quietly slipped downstairs, and stepped outside without bothering to bring an umbrella. I deliberately left my phone behind because I knew staring at a screen would only make it harder to sleep. Outside, it was strangely peaceful. I've always loved nature, and watching the trees sway gently while rain streamed down their branches was just what I needed. After about 20 minutes, I felt myself getting sleepy, which was exactly what I wanted. I turned around to head back home, hoping I'd be tired enough to sleep once I returned. As I was walking back through the park, I glanced toward the road and saw something unusual. A long black shape was lying flat in the middle of the street. At first, I assumed it was some oddly shaped trash bag or something similar. But the longer I stared, the clearer it became. It was a person lying motionless in the street, face down from what I could see. A sick feeling began rising in my stomach. The only thought racing through my head was that they must have been hit by a car, injured, or worse. There was no other reasonable explanation for why someone would be laying still in the middle of the road, especially with the rain coming down like this. My instincts told me to ignore it and keep walking, but I couldn't. My parents raised me to help someone if I saw them in trouble. So despite my fear, I started walking toward the figure in the road. As I got closer, I could see what they were wearing: black pants and a dark plaid shirt. Definitely not the kind of clothes someone would wear out in the heavy rain. Judging by the clothes, I figured it was a man, but I'd already guessed that. Maybe it was the seriousness of the situation, or something else. But as I stepped toward the street, I noticed for the first time that night just how cold I was. One moment the rain felt lukewarm, and the next it was freezing, if that even makes sense. As I reached the road, a loud screech echoed from somewhere behind me. Instinct kicked in and I spun around fast, adrenaline pumping through my veins. It sounded like a howl, but wasn't quite right, like a wounded animal. That's the best way I can explain it. I quickly scanned the trees, but saw nothing. The noise must have come from somewhere deeper in the park, so there was no immediate danger. Still, the strangeness of it made my heart race faster. I had never heard anything like that before, and not knowing what caused it filled me with fear. But that fear was about to get 1,000 times worse. When I turned back toward the street, the person was no longer lying down. They were sitting upright, staring directly at me. Everything around me seemed to fade, and my vision narrowed sharply. The only thing keeping me conscious was the soft, endless sound of rain hitting the ground. Before I could react, The man stood up and suddenly ran toward me, grinning wildly like a demon. Worse still, he held what looked like a kitchen knife in his hand. Until that moment, I had never known what it meant to truly fear for your life. I snapped out of my frozen state and ran as fast as I could in the opposite direction. As I fled, I heard him scream, "I'll kill you," at the top of his lungs. The wet grass made running difficult, but the only comfort I had was that he'd struggle with the same ground. I didn't want to lead him toward my house, so I ran into the trees, hoping to lose him in the park. I know that's where the screech came from, but I didn't have a better option. I didn't dare look back. I just ran, knowing my life depended on it. Considering how deranged he looked, I truly believe it did. I sprinted toward the thickest part of the park, praying I could hide before he caught up. I didn't even know if he was still chasing me, but I couldn't stop. Something told me if I slowed down, the fear alone would make me faint. I reached the woods, and just as I was about to collapse from exhaustion, I ducked behind a tree, gasping for air. I peeked behind me, but no one was there, or at least no one I could see. My mind was racing with one thought: how was I going to get home safely? I didn't want to move, so I stayed hidden. I must have waited 20 minutes or more before I finally stepped out from behind that tree. I chose the long way home, taking the path that looped around the far side of the park and out onto a street that led a few blocks away from my house. No one followed me. When I finally got home, I collapsed on my bed, soaked and completely shaken. I never got an explanation for anything that happened that night. What puzzles me most is that strange howl. I find it hard to believe it was connected to the man who chased me, but the timing feels too close to be a coincidence. I think maybe that guy heard the screech too, looked up, saw me, and for some reason decided to come after me. As for why, well, I have no idea. There are just some crazy people in the world. Maybe he was high on something. I know that's not a real answer, but I can't think of a better one. I still live in the same house today. Even though years have passed, I sometimes catch myself thinking about that night and wondering what really happened out there. I was often left home alone as a kid because my mom was a single parent for much of my childhood. She worked as a nurse with a tough schedule, and my brother had already gone off to college. This particular night, my mom was working an overnight shift. It was a weekend evening, so I invited Molly over, a girl I had been talking to, and she hung out for a while. We watched a few movies and spent some time together until she had to head home because her parents didn't want her staying out late. After she left, I was alone again to watch over the house. I stayed in bed watching TV in my room. My bedroom was upstairs and faced the backyard, so when someone dragged a chair across the deck outside, I heard it clearly. I got up, looked outside the window, and saw someone sitting in one of the deck chairs below. I called out Molly's name, thinking she had come back. She had just left less than 10 minutes before. But whoever was down there looked up at me, and it definitely wasn't Molly. I quickly moved away from the window to hide. I didn't recognize that person at all, especially in the dark. I messaged a few close friends in our group chat, asking if any of them were playing a prank on me, Those who replied said no and asked me what I was talking about. I didn't really believe any of my friends would come to my house just to mess with me anyway. Terrified, but still curious, I slowly approached the window again to take another look. That person was still sitting there in the chair, staring straight up at my window. It was a man, that was clear, and he had definitely seen me. I quickly backed away from the window again and turned off the TV. I sat on my bed, curled into a ball with my arms wrapped around my knees. I stayed there in the dark for a while. I didn't even want to touch my phone because I was afraid he would see the light from it. I also didn't want to make any noise because the window was open and I worried he'd hear the slightest sound. I hoped he'd think I wasn't in the room anymore. I waited what felt like forever, probably around 5 solid minutes, just sitting still. I really doubted that the man would still be there after all that time. I finally built up the courage to get up and peek out the window again. A little part of me felt like it died when I saw him still sitting there, staring right up at my window. Instead of hiding again, I tried to act brave and called down to him, "What do you want?" That's when I noticed his shoulders moving up and down like he was laughing really hard, but I couldn't hear him at first. Then I picked up on a faint whistling sound coming from him. It seemed like he was laughing so hard that he started to wheeze. I asked him again to please leave, then stepped away from the window. I went back to sit on my bed. For some reason, I was too scared to call the police. I left my room and sat at the top of the staircase, listening carefully. I heard the back door being pushed. He was trying to get inside the house. I ran back to my room to hide again. I was only 14 and had no idea what else to do. After a while, I heard the front door's knob being jiggled, and he was trying to force the door open too. Thankfully, he gave up quickly. I shut my bedroom window and pulled the curtains closed. If our doors hadn't been locked, I probably could have been killed easily. I was thin and weak at 14 and definitely not someone who could fight back. I didn't leave my room again until my mom finally came home around 9. When I told her what happened, she got angry at me for not calling 911. Looking back, I realized that was a really stupid mistake. It's one of the many things I did, or rather didn't do when I was younger, that I regret deeply. My name is David. I'm 28 years old. After getting divorced, I moved to a quiet town called Chatham in Alabama. Aside from my parents' place, I didn't really have anywhere else to stay, so I moved into my grandfather's old home. He had passed away a few years back and left the house to our family. It's located about 10 minutes from town and sits on 10 acres of land surrounded by forest. It's very quiet out there. I thought I'd appreciate that peace. The house is old, with wooden floors that creak and doors that are hard to open. It's the kind of place that always feels slightly cold, even with the thermostat turned up. Still, it was free, and I didn't have any better options. The first few nights were uneventful. I spent time unpacking and tidying up. I sat on the porch in the evenings with a beer. It felt peaceful. There were no cars, just wind rustling through the trees and the occasional hoot from an owl. Then the sounds began. The first time I noticed it was on the 7th night. I had just gotten into bed around midnight. I was nearly asleep when I heard whistling coming from outside. It wasn't any song I recognized, just a slow, broken, and off-tune melody. It seemed like someone was walking through the woods behind the house, whistling as they moved. It creeped me out, but I assumed it was just a hunter or maybe a drunk neighbor. The next night, it happened once more. Same time, same tune. But this time, it felt closer. I got out of bed and switched on the porch light, but didn't see anyone there. I went out with a flashlight and checked the yard. There was nothing, no footprints or any noise of someone fleeing, just the whistling fading deeper into the woods. I tried to ignore it for the next couple of nights. I stayed in bed and attempted to sleep through it, but each time, the whistling would begin around 1:17 a.m. I know that sounds oddly specific, but I'm sure it was always close to 1:15 or 1:19. It became so predictable it felt like a schedule. I began to suspect that someone was playing a prank on me, possibly someone who knew I was living there alone. I eventually called the sheriff's office. A few days later, an older deputy, who I'll refer to as Officer William, came by. He'd been working that job for a long time. When I explained what was happening, he became very quiet. He said, and I quote, "Your granddaddy used to call us about this exact thing. Said someone was whistling around the property late at night during springtime. We never found anything. I figured it was just old age catching up to him. But now you're hearing it too? That unsettled me. I had no clue my grandfather had dealt with something similar." Officer William advised me to keep all the doors locked and to avoid going outside after dark. I started following that advice, though I was already doing most of it. I checked every window to make sure it was secured. One night, I even put chairs under the doorknobs just to be safe, but the whistling kept coming back, each time sounding a little closer. One night I heard it near the shed. It was louder than usual, like someone was just outside. I grabbed a flashlight and looked through the blinds. I didn't see anyone, but I didn't dare step outside. The next night I heard it on the front porch, right at the door. 3 slow whistles followed by silence. Then the night after, it came from underneath the floorboards. I swear it felt like someone was in the crawl space, whistling through the vents. I didn't sleep at all that night. The following day I searched the attic, hoping to find something my grandfather might have left behind. I discovered a box of his old journals. He wrote extensively about the whistling. According to him, it happened every spring for over 10 years. He didn't know who was doing it, but believed someone was keeping an eye on the house. He said he used to sit at the front door with a rifle just in case. It only seemed to happen after my grandmother passed, when he lived alone. I called Officer William again. He came back and looked through the journals, and I could see he was uneasy. He told me to stay cautious. He said, "Don't open the door unless you know who's there." That night I stayed awake. I sat on the couch with a shotgun across my lap. I barely knew how to load the thing. I waited. At exactly 1:17 a.m., the whistling began once more. But this time it wasn't coming from outside. It came from the hallway inside the house. I froze in place. The hallway light was off, and I could hear the tune getting closer with each step. I stood up, pointed the shotgun, and yelled, "Who's there?" The whistling instantly stopped. I switched on the hallway light. Nothing was there. No person. I couldn't sleep after that. Two nights went by without a sound. I was starting to get physically ill. I had no idea who this person was or why they were targeting me or my grandfather, but I knew it was real. I don't believe in hallucinations to that level, and I don't believe in ghosts. This was an actual person. After that night, things went silent for 2 more days. No sounds, no movement, nothing. I thought maybe, just maybe, it was over. On the 3rd night, I went to bed shortly after midnight. I didn't stay up. I left the hallway light on just in case. At exactly 1:17 a.m., I was awakened by a new sound, not whistling, but knocking. Slow, deliberate knocks. 3 of them. They were coming from inside the house near the back door. Then it went quiet. I didn't move. I stayed in bed listening carefully. About a minute later, I heard something new. A floorboard creaked in the hallway. Then another. Someone was walking. The hallway light turned off. My heart raced as I grabbed my shotgun and stepped into the hallway. It was pitch black. But at the far end, I saw a figure. A person dressed in black with a pale face. They were completely still, just staring at me. I raised the shotgun, though my hands were trembling. I tried to say something, but my mouth was dry. I lifted the shotgun again, hands still shaking. I managed to yell, "Don't move," though my voice wavered. In the darkness, I saw the figure start to raise their leg and turn like they were preparing to run. I shouted, "Stop!" And at that moment, they bolted out of the hallway, disappearing from my sight. I could hear their heavy footsteps rushing through the front door and out into the night. I ran outside and fired the shotgun, not into the air, but straight into the dark, secretly hoping I might hit them. I yelled, "Don't come back." The shot echoed loudly, bouncing off the house and porch. I locked everything up, jumped into my truck, and drove straight into town. That night, I slept in my truck. The next morning, Officer William visited the house again and told me the front door had been unlocked. That proved the person had a key to my grandfather's house. Nothing had been damaged or taken, but Officer William told me to change the locks. He also advised me unofficially to move out of that house. He believed someone in those woods didn't want either me or my grandfather living there. I drove to a local hardware store and replaced all the locks immediately. That same day, I left the house and went to my parents' home out of state for a while. My dad handled selling the house later. We removed anything sentimental, and the rest was either sold or left behind. Of course, my father didn't mention that a stalker had been hanging around that property for decades. I don't know how they got a key, who they were, or why my grandfather never warned us. It all deeply disturbs me. Personally, I think it was a troubled person living somewhere nearby. I eventually moved to a more populated area. This whole experience left me too shaken to live anywhere remote again.